think that's gonna keep happening. The people are just gonna pop in. And start. Should I stand up? Yeah, I'll stand up. Good morning. I'm gonna kick this thing off. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not mic'd up, so I'm sort of used to yelling. I'm Christy Rogers. I want to thank the National Security Institute, Tara McFeely and the team. Jamil Jaffer, who is not with us, but he's always with us in spirit. So thanks, and those that know him know this. But thanks all for being here. We have an exceptionally timely discussion today. And specifically, I don't want to get the title wrong. Today's panel, we're talking about securing our armament stockpiles, supply chain resilience in an uncertain age. And I'm going to stand because I feel like standing today, and I like to see all your wonderful faces. So we have an extraordinary team of panelists today, of experts, not just panelists, who have worked in industry, defense policy, legislative branch, executive branch, in industry, that are going to talk today about some of the challenges and some of the fixes. So what we want you to walk away with today is that in your head. What's working and what can we do to either expand and leverage some of the things that are working and scale? And what do we need to continue to do to fix some of the things that aren't working, but actually to expand, to grow, to strengthen, and to scale at a time where we have geopolitical events that are volatile, in a time where trade is uncertain, at a time where our supply chains are being tested by what? By disruption. What kind of disruption? Trade disruption, lack of workforce development, uncertain rules, disease, coercion by adversarial nations, conflict. We need to figure out how to address a challenge in this environment that is 30 years in the making. That's not easy. This fix is not easy. When you start talking about one challenge in our stockpiles and how do we resupply, how do we ensure that the defense industrial base has enough critical materials and components to deliver what they need to deliver for the US government, for our economic and national security, on time and in an efficient manner, and keep that going? How do we do that at a time where we have continual conflicts, or we have surprises on the horizon, where we've got disease, where we have an adversarial nation that controls not 85, not 90, but 94% to 100% of some of our critical components, 94% to 99% of heavy rare earths. That for our defense industrial base and for the advanced manufacturing for the defense industrial base, we are almost completely reliant on China for those critical components, those heavy rare earths. And by all estimates accounts, that is not going to get much better by 2030. Experts are saying right now, if we continue on the pace we are only going to reduce that reliance, that 94 to 99% reliance, to 91% reliance by 2030. And this is assuming that China doesn't turn that little knob and that vice on continuing to apply export controls, onto continuing to coerce US Western companies that are operating outside the US. So these fabulous four humans are going to solve these problems today. Now, what they're going to do today is we're going to talk about, again, what are some of the things that are working? What can we leverage? The administration has done an enormous amount in the past 18 months with some initiatives to help expand production. We are looking at new initiatives across the globe, particularly in the global south, on mining, in extractives. We still have some problems. We're still doing this in some silos. We're not looking at the whole value chain. And people say, well, there's different congressional committees here, there are different agencies. Understood, but we cannot look through these challenges in a myopic lens. We have to have a whole of government and a whole of nation approach that is very analogous to the Manhattan Project today. And that means industry. And that means industry needs to be at the table. That also means that we have got to try in a hyper-partisan world to take the politics out of these conversations because it is about national security and it is about economic security. We also need to look at this in a way where we don't assume and we don't think, we're not arrogant enough to think the United States can do this by ourselves. In this environment of hyperpartisanship, in this environment of tariffs, in this environment of global conflict, we need our allies. And we've got initiatives like AUKUS and a few others where we can say, okay, we can point to. And we want to continue to point to some of these and say, how do we leverage these? How do we scale these? How do we continue to work together to have the conversations where policy is aligning with production, with what industry needs? And a couple of the things that we also need to figure out, which we've not been able to figure out in 30 years, permitting. That's fun. How about that? We could spend 2 days talking about that and probably not get a good answer. Okay, well then we get to rely on our allies. Canada, Mexico, maybe they can figure it out. We also need to stop focusing 100% on extractive. We're gonna fund all these mines. Fantastic. 94% all the processing and refining of these critical minerals, particularly the rare earths I mentioned, happens in China. Great, we can own all the mines in the world. Resources are found where resources are found. We have got to start investing and expanding and scaling processing and refining. And what about workforce development? What about training? What about training the skilled workers for all of these manufacturing, processing, refining facilities? Where are we going to find them if we don't come up with the solutions today? So again, this discussion is happening at a very timely, pivotal moment in our history. We are at the cusp of, not cusp, we are in the digital revolution. We have global conflicts happening all the time. It's a challenge. But what we also have is US ingenuity, US innovation entrepreneurship, US capital markets, and our allies. Those are three things that we have to focus on, leverage, and double down simultaneously. Again, a whole of nation approach, a whole of government approach that includes industry at the table. So our panel today, again, no pressure for them. They're going to answer these questions for us. Now, we're going to have a really good, lively discussion about this. I'm going to say this once, and then I'm going to come back to it when we open it up for conversation. If you have a question, please say who you are and what organization that you belong to. I'm going to introduce the panelists. I've got to put my glasses on because the computer has wrecked my eyes. It's not age. And I want to make certain I get everybody's name, title right. So I'm actually going to read some of this. All right, I'm going to start with, I'm going to go in alphabetical order. How about this? So Mackenzie Eaglin, did I say it right? Excellent. Mackenzie, Senior Fellow at American Enterprise Institute, where she works on defense strategy, defense budgets, and military readiness. She's co-chair of the National Commission on the Future of Navy and a prolific writer on defense issues. People ask her what she thinks about numerous issues all the time and is quoted. Isn't that correct, Mackenzie? She's like, yes, I am. Good things and bad things that I say, right?
Yes.
Then we have Rachel Hoff, Policy Director at the Ronald Reagan Policy Institute. Before joining the Institute, she was a speechwriter and policy advisor for Senator John McCain at the Senate Armed Services Committee and has been involved in policy discussions, negotiations, and development for numerous years, since she was 12, I think.
That's right.
Right? Okay. Then we've got Mark Smith. Mark, Chairman, President, CEO, and Grand Poobah of NeoCorp Development. I mean, you've got all those titles. NeoCorp. Oh, NeoCorp. NeoCorp is developing, I believe right now, the Elk Creek Critical Minerals Project in southeast Nebraska. Mark brings an extraordinary amount of industry perspective, research, development, and innovation to operating and developing and financing mining and strategic projects. Before NeoCorp, Mark was CEO and director of Molycorp and president and CEO of Chevron Mining. So for a lot of the very challenging industrial mining questions that we have, we're going to direct those to Mark today. Good. And then we've got Dominic Yanko. Dom tells me you are how new to Beacon Global Strategies?
Couple of weeks,
but she's the Associate Vice President in National Security Technology Practice at Beacon Global Strategies. So a couple of weeks, she's still an expert, brings a ton of expertise to Beacon Global. Because prior to joining Beacon, she was the Associate Director for Growth at Andril Industries. So also has a very good in-depth perspective on a defense industrial based company working for the Department of War. So with that, I think I'm going to continue to stand. I would like to open it up to some questions here for the panel. And I'm going to start with one that I'm going to just kind of go right down and ask everybody the question. Given the current geopolitical environment, given the numerous conflicts that we have, Ukraine, Straits of Hormuz, and other conflicts that we don't know about, we are putting an enormous amount of pressure on our defense industrial base and our stockpiles. This question I'm thinking of, we could probably spend all day on it. From your perspective and your vantage point, we'll start with Rachel. What is one thing that you want this audience to know as we begin this conversation that we need to focus on, we being industry, but from your perspective, also government, to address the dwindling stockpiles on defense tech, critical minerals, and rare earths?
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Christy, for the great framing, and to NSI for organizing the event, and to all of you for coming. I think one framing piece that I would put on it under that question is around the conflicts we're seeing and this conversation that we're having domestically around these shortcomings when it comes to stockpiles and munitions, is that none of the conflicts that we're seeing around the world created the munitions and manufacturing capacity shortcomings that we're seeing per se, right? So you have kind of the political conversation, which I agree with Christy, it would be helpful to strip the partisan politics from this conversation, but just to speak to it for a moment, you have some on one side that say, oh, it was arming the Ukrainians that's really created these shortcomings. And you have some on the other side who on another side who might say, oh, it's the US military action in Iran that has created our depletion of munitions stockpiles. And in reality, folks who have been paying attention to these issues for years would have told you before US military action in Iran, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that these shortcomings have been here for a long time. And it's these conflicts, especially Operation Epic Fury, that have really shed light on this problem in a new way. In a sense, that's not great because we're all finding out about this huge problem that has existed. But in another sense, it's really, there's a silver lining and a real opportunity to take advantage of this moment where those here in Congress, at the department, at the political leadership at the White House, certainly in industry, are seized by this problem of the shortcomings, not just in our supply and in our stockpiles of munitions, but also in the challenges that undergird what it would take to rebuild. So whether it's manufacturing capacity, whether it's workforce, whether it's supply chain, what we're seeing, I think, in this moment is a real opportunity to leverage this moment to try to make a difference and move in the right direction. So that's sort of the framing I would put around it, and to say I'm happy to speak, later in the conversation to what we've seen out of the department, the Pentagon, out of Congress, that's working to start moving things in the right direction. Happy to join the panel in talking more about what industry can and should do to deliver on fixing this problem. But that framing around this isn't a new problem. There is new and broader awareness of this problem because of the global conflicts is one takeaway that I'd start with.
Excellent. Just like COVID shone a light on supply chains of PPE and pharmaceuticals. We've had a problem in our supply chains for a long time. Mark, from an industry perspective.
Yeah, from an industry perspective, this is a serious issue. We've been pointing this out for a long time. You don't start a mine or a processing facility in the United States overnight. The studies came out on this a little over a year ago, and the United States was the second worst nation in the world in terms of number of years it takes to get a mine and processing facility up and running. Average of 29 years to do that. So now what we're doing is we're saying we have these conflicts. The nice, comfortable world market that we all lived in with single suppliers and just-in-time delivery, completely gone now. We need regional markets with short supply chains. You don't create those overnight. And we're talking about, in our case, our project should take about 3 years to build, and it's one of the fastest ones out there. Most of these other projects are multiple years away, maybe a decade away. So what we've always historically done is we purchase what we need when we need it, and then if things don't go right, then we stockpile. And that's a great solution, unless there's only one seller and they're not selling. How do you stockpile? Stockpiling is not the answer either. And then I would also, not trying to be defending the Chinese, but the Chinese have a supply and demand problem as well. And I think you're seeing, not just them being antagonistic to the United States and other allied nations, they're trying to supply their own economy with these materials. Those heavy rare earths, when you're dependent on Myanmar for 50% of your feedstock for the heavy rare earths, and Myanmar quits shipping the feedstock to China, all of a sudden you've got a supply problem in China. And if that happens in the U.S., we're going to take care of the U.S. first. Well, it happens in China, they're going to take care of China first. So there's multiple issues going on in this drama right now. But I'm in your camp, Christy. I think American innovation and creativeness is going to solve this problem. And on the labor front, I'm actually kind of turning around and getting a little bit happy. There's an uptick in the trade school admissions right now. There's more and more kids that are starting to realize how important it is to do the trade work to make these things happen. And we're seeing a nice uptick in that area. Engineering schools, mining schools are seeing upticks in admissions. That's a positive sign. People are getting it. So yeah, we got a lot of work to do. Nothing's going to happen overnight, but we will solve this problem. We always do.
It's excellent. I'm glad to hear on the workforce challenge, because that's been one thing that people sort of gloss over. Yeah, we have a problem, but nobody's really addressing it.
And you're seeing a lot of support from industry too. We're providing what the schools need to teach the kids, coursework, actual equipment. Industry is taking this very seriously.
Excellent. Dom.
Thanks, Christy, and I want to thank NSI for having me here today. I think we often, over the last decade, kind of frame this as a money problem. We've doubled our spending on munitions and haven't necessarily seen that same increase in production. And so I think if you kind of take a step back, there's some challenges that come up underneath, right? Where, you've got inconsistent demand signals. You've got unstable, fragile sub-tier suppliers, right? And then, we've been investing in and procuring these very exquisite systems that aren't necessarily meant to be produced very rapidly. And so, Christy, to your point earlier, I think in the last 18 months, we've seen some reforms that actually start to move the needle on this, where, you've got on-ramps for new entrants that are producing, more rapidly developed and fielded capabilities. You've got the multi-year procurement frameworks that are actually sending that demand signal to industry and allowing them to provide a little investment earlier. And then you've got direct investment into some of those sub-tiers. And so I think there's a lens of this where the tools are there, and we just have to be very consistent about applying them. I think, when you think about industrial strategy, right, it's a little bit more of a marriage than a fling. So we should kind of consider taking that approach.
I might use that analogy. All right, Mackenzie.
So I'd like to focus on the two things that are understudied, because the issue, does have such heavy scrutiny in Washington, which is a wonderful thing, an important thing actually. But the money, there is money there. There's also private capital as well, but structuring and the financials behind these really large deals, where say you want to open new facilities, new factories, new energetics, new whatever, chemical plants, new where you pack and load and move armaments. These are really complicated deals. And most people in government haven't done these before. Right? And most people in government haven't worked in industry before, which is part of the challenge working with. And so what you're running up against is the traditionals and the new defense tech companies, which is good because we need a high-low mix of missiles, bombs, rockets, munitions, ammo, and mines, which is kind of the portfolio of things that blow up, what they're finding is they try to take these large sort of arrangements to the government, which they're going to need support from the government to back. Like, no one's going to back a lease for 30 years for a company that hasn't ever proven before that they can build this new 3D printed cruise missile, which is actually happening today by a startup. And so they need help and nobody knows what to do. So that's sort of got to figure that out. And then secondly is the Department of Defense or War moving out, executing. Even in the last administration, they had a munitions team that was constantly focused on accelerating accelerating, going faster. The Pentagon can charge the hill, but if no one's behind them, if no one's leading this at the NSC, and I've asked Department of Commerce, what are you doing? State, what are you doing about ITAR and FMF, which is the thing that everyone talks about for 30 years and no one does anything about? Who's clearing the brush with EPA? Because nothing can get approved for anything. Because most munitions are basically, the energetics are basically more like Dow chemicals than they are like a Anduril. ATF, setback rules for things that explode. Who's waiving all of these things to make everything go faster? There's no intergovernmental effort, and the Pentagon will hit a wall very quickly. It already is. They're hitting walls left and right because nobody at the top is trying to sweep away, wave away, exemption away the challenges the Defense Department's customers that they're asking to do this are facing.
Going back to, we need a whole of government approach with industry at the table, i.e. a Manhattan Project, to talk about this, because once you pull a thread, all of a sudden another problem pops up in a different agency and they're not communicating to each other. So I have been given a lovely little card here that says we have to evacuate this room, not evacuate in a bad sense, but leave this room, vacate, by 10 o'clock. So I'm going to try to ask a couple rapid fire questions, which is going to be a challenge. Given the enormity, the scope of this problem and the challenge, given there are a lot of new initiatives, I just saw one announced today. I know they've been working on, the Department of War Office of Strategic Capital announced a new National Security Critical Minerals Fund, capital fund, today. What, in your mind, again, from your vantage points, what is working that should be codified? So from a legislative standpoint, that potentially would not transcend the next administration. What needs to be codified? What's working? Let's just start with that. I'm not going to talk about what's broken. We've got the NDA, out on the floor. We've got the budget request for FY27. What's working that needs to be codified? Mark, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Christy. And I won't be an expert on what needs to be codified, but I do think that there are some things that are working right now. First of all, there is a tremendous amount of capital flowing to the industries that need that capital. And it's been hard to come by. I've been with NioCorp for about 13 years now. The first 12 were pretty dry in terms of being able to raise money. The last year has been phenomenal. We raised over $500 million in the actual market, not donations from the federal government. But the federal government has multiple programs now in place, and they've been given orders at the top. Get these funds flowing, get these projects going. That is working. Now, there's some other things that have happened. About a year ago, MP Materials announced a deal with the Department of War that included a floor price. And, my first reaction as an American taxpayer was, well, I thought, we were in a capitalist society. What's going on here? And then I remembered my 38 years in the rare earth space, and I've watched China do the same thing 3 times now, where they want 100% of the market. And if they start losing a little bit of it, they flood the markets and they lower the prices, and then all the businesses outside of China go broke and go into bankruptcy, and we're done. So those floor prices are meaningful, and it gives traction to the industry, and that is going to allow us to get back in the game. And what I also like about it is that it's a 10-year time frame for that price support. It's not in perpetuity. And that 10 years, this is where I come back to innovation and how technologically advanced we can be in this country. We'll figure out how to do things at the same price or the same cost that the Chinese do today, and will use real economics. And that's kind of a surprise too, because I've watched the Chinese economic system, and it's fascinating to say the least. They just keep shifting things around. It's a game of chess. So I think that, our efforts to get money flowing into the right things is really working. Having said that, I will also note that there's a couple of things in the industry, and although I've been in rare earths for 38 years, I've been in mining for over 45, and there's a couple of things you always need to keep in mind in mining, and they're fairly simple. One is ore grade is king. So if you don't have a good resource to mine, you're not going to be successful. And then number two, on the processing side, if the processing that's being discussed sounds too good to be true, probably is. And so all that I mean by that is that we're probably going to have a couple of failures along the way as well, because our government is so transactional oriented, and they understand the tight timeframes we're working against. They're putting money out, for things that some of them aren't going to be successful. And we have to be prepared for that as well, because I still remember the days of things like A123. Well, we put a heck of a lot of money into that, and it failed. It went bankrupt. And that was the price we had to pay at that point in time. Tough price, but we've got to get ready for the successes as well as the failures. We're so far behind the 8 ball. We've got to do something, and we have to do it in a very passionate way at this point in time.
That's one thing that worries me the most, is a failure in this hyper-partisan environment that will shut down all the progress we've made.
Ruins the reputation of the whole industry.
Yep. Mackenzie, I'm going to go to you on this one. From your vantage point, from a policy, a strategic standpoint, what is something that's working that could disappear at the next administration that Congress could do something about to codify?
There is tremendous progress. I was at the Pentagon yesterday. We were talking about Tomahawk production, and at the peak of any time in period of time prior to now, the most the factories ever built was 96 a year. Last month they built 46. That's huge progress in our sort of exquisite suite of systems. Again, we need that high-low mix. So bringing on new entrants, and I asked about that. Everybody feels good about the progress and the momentum, but the challenges are that everything has to rise up to such a senior level to get what I talked about, the arm waving away of the bureaucracy and the processes that are designed to go slow. They're designed for everyone to say no and no one to say yes. And so we said, who can help at a lower, this was a senior whatever person, and we said, who can do this work so it doesn't all have to flow up to the secretary of the something? And they were like, nobody. It can't. So that's a problem, and I don't know how to get at that. I don't know how you change that, actually, because it's more of a culture change. And then the second is money and all this uncertainty. The Defense Department is staring down 2 years of a continuing resolution in 3-month increments. That is a nightmare scenario, one that's never happened before for the department, and all know we're in a norm-shattering time, where since 1947, DoD had never operated under a continuing resolution for a full year until a year ago. So now it's sort of we've broken precedent. Will the uncertainty persist and the lack of funds? Because most of the money for munitions and every component, every way you turn the kaleidoscope, is in reconciliation and in the supplemental. It's not in the base budget. Almost everything will grind to a screeching halt, absent clarity and the bill signed into law at the higher top lines. And I'm very pessimistic, unfortunately, on that.
Yes, we should do this closer to happy hour so we can all, right? Because it is very dire. Go ahead, Mark.
Just think of the math.
Yep.
That Mackenzie just talked about. 96 a year. We did 46 in 1 month. There are no heavy rare earths flowing into the country right now,
right,
which means that we just used about what we normally use in a year, half a year. We've done in 1 month. How long is that stockpile going to last? This is the stockpiling issue is serious, and there's no way to buy it right now.
You want?
I have a positive note.
Excellent.
I
Yes,
could
please.
Emphasize, although I don't disagree with Mackenzie's assessment, particularly on the impact of continuing resolutions on the department, and you should all take that back to the offices that you work with to emphasize that with your teams. One thing that I do think is working and then has really improved in the last couple of years is the demand signal that's coming out of the Pentagon. And they're doing that in a couple of different ways. Number one, on dollars, right? So all of this will be complicated if Congress continues to fund the Pentagon on continuing resolutions. But as it relates to the administration's budget request, Don mentioned the doubling of funding for munitions programs, the way that the administration has signaled not just putting dollars against the problem, but also doing so on a multi-year basis. That sends a signal to those in industry that are responsible for armaments that this is something that's here to stay. And then two, not just on dollars, but on sort of the Pentagon's way of doing business. There's an element of this that I think the administration deserves a lot of credit for about asking not just our traditional prime to build the exquisite and quite expensive systems that have been a part of the American way of war for a long time, but also asking new entrants to build munitions in new and different ways at a different price point, at a lower price point, to achieve that kind of high-low mix. Because one thing that I think we should emphasize as well is when you hear this conversation about like, oh, you know, the weapons, the munitions and systems that we used in Iran are these exquisite, you know, high-end platforms that are so expensive, and we need to figure out a lower cost approach. That doesn't mean that we're choosing between one or the other. I think most experts would agree that we need to have both, and to be able to achieve the mass that it turns out continues to be important to fighting and winning wars by having a mix of those high-end, low-end, exquisite, low-cost systems. And so kind of thinking about how we maximize deterrence under that construct is really important. And I think both when it comes to the dollars and the way of doing business, changing the way of doing business, the demand signal that this Pentagon has sent to industry is really something that offers at least a sign for hope that something might work, that Congress can be a part of helping double down on.
I really wanted to explore the aggregating demand idea, but we'll come back to that in a second, because that's a really important one. I mean, there's the solutions for heavy rare earths is not the same solution for nickel, lithium, copper. And we all need to keep that in mind, because value chains are very different. Stockpiling them are very different. The amounts needed are very different. Dom, with I'm going to put your Anduril hat back on. NioCorp and Anduril, I would say, you know, newer companies, newer tech, heavily reliant on research and development. What would you say from your perspective was really working that you would like to see expanded?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned this kind of in my opening remarks, right? But on-ramp programs like the Air Force's FAM program are a really great way to bring in innovation and sort of de-risk having a lot of vendors on the table that allows them to really move to the next milestone by flight test, right? You've got, again, the multi-year procurement buys that I mentioned, and then, you know, things like sort of early purchase agreements where, you know, assuming that you pass the tests, the government tests criteria, you know, they will buy those programs. I think all of those are really great examples of what's been working. I think the important thing here is maybe not to codify those programs specifically, but to actually focus on codifying the process, to go to Rachel's point of how, you know, the Pentagon does business, codify the process. And then the only thing I would add to that is, you know, those frameworks aren't necessarily contracts, right? And so this is where Mackenzie's point of, you know, appropriations actually do matter, because otherwise your codification is just a press release at that point.
From so true. From all of your perspectives, is this happening, or would it help for the Department of War to pool purchases across the branches and defense contractors to send a clear demand signal? Or do you already think that's happening?
I think it's happening.
Okay. Excellent.
There was one industry CEO, one of the primes, who told me, his team told me, In the last administration, they met with the Deputy Secretary of Defense one time. In the first 5 months of this administration, they've met with Feinberg 100 times. So the White House had their, munitions meeting on CNN or whatever a couple weeks ago. That was not the first one. So the senior leader intent is there, the agreements are there, the money is not. And so that's, private capital is waiting on the sidelines. The government money is the slowest point in the slowest, I guess, challenge. But overall, I think it's going well.
I'm going to pull that string for a second. So the private capital is sitting on the sidelines. I hear this all the time from various government agencies, particularly the Department of War, saying, why is it sitting on the sidelines? And I'm like, well, the industry needs it de-risked a bit. Mark, you pointed out to the fact that the capital is there.
Yeah.
So then why is the capital, Mackenzie, from your standpoint, on private capital still sitting on the sidelines? And what are they waiting for? Are they waiting for appropriations, or is the government just too slow and not keeping up with the private sector cycle?
Both, but more the latter, where they're hitting the same problem a traditional company would bump up against, which is the exceedingly slow peacetime contracting environment. And I was raising this at that same meeting I talked about yesterday, where I said, again, senior leaders are putting the memo out, but the rank and file, the people who have to create these, because they don't use AI, even though I think contracting is perfect for large language models, but that system is designed to go slow on purpose so people don't go to jail, right? That's all they think about as contracting officers. I can't go to jail. Public money, I get that, and I appreciate that. I said, but it's as slow as ever. The Army was on a war footing since when Russia invaded Ukraine and they had to arm 2 allies, and then October 7th. So I'd say the Army's kind of gotten there over the last 4 or 5 years, mostly, but I don't see any speed of contracting with the Air Force or the Navy whatsoever. So anyway, they're running up against this challenge of, their cycles are much quicker than U.S. government, the snake swallowing the rabbit. It takes time to move through the system, and it's too slow.
Yeah, DFARS. Oh boy, let's have that conversation. So we have a couple minutes. I want to do a lightning round, and then maybe if somebody has a question, we can snag a question. Lightning round. There's so many things that we have not talked about, but if you want this group to walk away with one thing from your vantage point on what needs to happen to continue innovating, to continue moving capital, to keeping in mind the whole value chain, including recycling, stockpile is not the only answer. It's not the silver bullet. There is no silver bullet, but from your vantage point, combined together, what is the one thing, and Rachel, I'll start with you, then we'll just go right down. One thing you want this group to walk away with?
I'll leave CRs to Mackenzie, but I'll emphasize something that came out of the Pentagon's new, Secretary Hegseth's new acquisition transformation strategy around providing advanced market commitments. So these are sort of a way to send a multi-year demand signal as this conversation around multi-year procurement evolves. I'd take a look at advanced market commitments as something that I think Congress could do, to your point about codifying authorities on the department side, that would help.
Awesome. Mark.
It's a tough question because there's so many variables here. I'm going to go back to the price support mechanisms. I think we need to see a lot more of that to make sure that as we're moving to these regional economies and creating onshore platforms for this processing, that we have the price supports that we need to keep that business in business. Otherwise, we're going to be right back where we started. So it's kind of a tough thing to say, but those price supports provide the traction we need to get going. That's when private capital flows. It just makes everything open up.
I completely agree, and I'm just going to take moderator's privilege right now. When I first saw that MP Materials deal, I was like, oh my God, we can't outcompete China with how China does business. We have to rely on our own. However,
We'll get there.
We will get there, and it is a solution that we shouldn't rely on, but implement strategically.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just going to say on top of that, the price floors, the price support, so we insulate and mitigate some of this price shock that China can control, combined with permitting reform, I'm going to say that again, and sending a strong demand signal. I think those three things help alleviate some of the uncertainty in the market. Okay, over to you, Dom.
I think it's kind of what we're all saying, right? It's a very broad answer, but this isn't a they problem; it's a we problem. There's no single owner, whether it's the department, Congress, sub-tier suppliers, defense tech, more traditionals, whole of government, you name it, right? Everyone has a piece in this, and if you actually think about solving it through that system, as opposed to relying on Hail Marys, I think that's actually the approach we need to take.
Completely agree. Thank you.
I'm going to build on your point, Chrissy. There's too much uncertainty in the fiscal and regulatory environments anybody who has fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, to customers, to their companies, this is a terrible customer, understand, the US government. If they don't figure out how to get appropriations, get to regular order, and 27 defense bills signed into law, Congress will not get what it's seeking to achieve in those exact same bills that are stalled.
And we need Congress, and we need the legislative branch to function and to work here, because the executive branch can come in, and we have executive orders across the board. But then what happens in 4 years after that? Do those executive orders disappear? Do those projects disappear? And then industry is standing there going, "Hey, that was working, and you just eliminated it." Or so we do need all three branches on that, but particularly the two to work together. Do we have time for a question from the audience? Or do we need to vacate? I'll ask the powers that be. Two questions or 2 minutes?
2 questions.
Okay, excellent. Okay, name and organization.
Nicolas in the Pakistan Environment Committee. I think when you mentioned that it takes 29 years to go to the whole process and everything, okay, how many users Google had 29 years ago has 0 users, and technology is advancing so fast. So if we start, if it takes us 29 years to start exploring a new mineral that the defense needs, we're going to be always very, very far behind. How much of those 29 years are pure waste time? Because I understand that there has to be like some studies, some stuff. There are certain processes that might take a little bit of time, but it cannot take 29 years. That is like 30 pieces.
I wish it didn't. And in our case, we were able to get our permits in about 11 years. So it was much faster. So remember, the average is 29. And I want to be careful how I say this, because all the environmental things that we need to do, those are important, and we're serious about those. We want them to be done right. But I'll also say that our system of citizen lawsuits is creating a lot of that delay, because you can just keep suing and keep suing and keep suing. And there needs to be some final decisions at some point so we can either move or not move. And I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to get too political in my answer. I'm sure that there's a lot of politics in the room here. But we just need to, I think, get a better handle on the citizen lawsuit provisions.
Underscore, emphasize, exclamation point. It's federal issues as well as state issues, and in a lot of areas we talk legislatively from a federal standpoint, but we really need to talk to the governors as well in this, and from a state perspective, evolving from the Department of War, working with and regularly updating industry on which mineral and when. And then working with our allies, because we can't assume that we're going to have a mine with a processing and refining facility for, and this is a funny one, any of the heavy rare earths in the United States, even within that 29-year time frame. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Name, serial number.
Okay, Melissa Weiss, SAP LL, but this might have come from a previous question. We just came back from Indo-Pacific. We'll tour that for a field study, and one of those was with the Australian Geoscience. They're very eager for us to use a lot more of their resources, whether it's for launch sites or a lot of other things. I was going to ask Mark, have you dealt with the Australians? Do you work with them often, and also if you could just speak for a moment, we still have the same sticky wicket that comes with China. They're a middle power, so.
Yeah,
They will roll out.
so I could answer that really quickly and just say, ore grade is king. So we would love to work with Australia. I think they do have some natural resources that will be economic, and there's a lot of them that are just simply going to struggle to be economic because ore grade is king. So you've got to have the right resources, and that nature puts those where nature puts them. You can't control that. The United States is actually quite blessed with resources. We just need to open them up and use them. But Australia I have so many friends in Australia, and the mining industry is very strong over there. They have certain minerals that are absolutely going to be part of our economy, but not a lot of them. Those heavy rare earths are going to be a problem.
I'll answer this and then we need to wrap. There's a lot we are doing and we can do with allied nations, particularly take the Five Eyes, maybe minus the Kiwis, throw in another one, right? I mean, however you want to look at it, but we really need them, our allies and those that we have a national security sharing agreement with, to sit at the table and have some of these conversations. Because while we are blessed in the United States, minerals are found where they're found, we all have different varying capabilities, and we have to send a consistent demand signal to our shared national economic security and defense industry base. And that's just something, again, adding another layer of complexity here. We can't just do this in a silo. And I feel like we just scratched the surface of this conversation. We're done, aren't we? We concluded. So thanks to these brilliant folks at this table. I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here in light of all of the challenges getting in and hopefully not getting out. Thank you to National Security Institute. Okay, we could have, that was, sorry.
I thought they were just